Some 23,000 people, foreigners, yes, dreaded foreigners, arrived by plane in Australia last year. They applied for asylum and stayed freely working in the community. During the same period, 70 people arrived by boat. There were 4 boats in all which were recorded. It was these foreigners, just 0.3% of that 23,000 which arrived by plane, who were demonised by the media and politicians. Notably, one boat was a bunch of young, impoverished fishermen on the prowl for trepang or sea cucumbers that got off course and landed on the shores of Western Australia. And Border Force, well, there was a big kerfuffle about that. Were they real fishermen? Or were they imposters? What we like to do here at Michael West Media is demolish the spin and the fear-mongering and look through to the facts and the reasons behind the stories which are bandied about by politicians and fossil media. We peer behind the fairy tales. We look at the maths, we look at the evidence, we look at the perspective. And on this one, the facts are cavalierly overblown for political gain, for points. On the maths, 23,000 people via plane, 70 boat people in all, 0.3% of asylum seekers arriving by boat. Now let that sink in. While 90% plus of the press coverage is for the boat people, very little for the plane people. They are less than a third of 1% of the asylum seekers. And what of the human factor? Why would you put your family at risk getting on a rickety boat in Kupang in Indonesia, People Smugglers Central, and making the journey when you probably can't swim 800 kilometres from Indonesia to the Kimberley coast in northwest WA, risking a maze of tricky offshore reefs, no lights at night, for days? Well, you would only do it, of course, if you are completely desperate. It's a high-risk venture. People die. You would only do it if you are facing persecution in your home country or severely bad economic circumstances, say China, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, or Afghanistan. Why would you do it? Especially if you had read that when you are detected, you would be plonked into a detention centre on another island, Nauru. Surely the risks are immense, and you would only do it if you were desperate. And while they pile into the country in the airport terminals, the people on the boats must surely be good prospects for humanitarian entry. Of course, the courts can decide that, but that would seem to be the case, having passed the desperation exam. It's a high hurdle. Incidentally, Duncan Graham, our Indonesian correspondent, did a piece a couple of days ago. He travelled to Kupang in Indonesia and he found people smugglers, people associated with that trade, apparently thriving. So perhaps they're not all being picked up. Besides looking at the actual facts of a situation, at the maths or the evidence, we like to look beyond the spin, at the human factor. It's a journalistic thing. We take the view that people are people, whatever their race or religion. There are good and bad and everything in between. And yes, there are certain characteristics which pertain to different groups of people. But on the whole, one group is just as good or bad as another and everything in between. They have their ups and downs and their upsides and their downsides. This brings us to intolerance and this goodies and baddies narrative which is played out in the fossil media. The law of Tingle, beat up by News Corp this very week, springs to mind. And there was Sky and the Murdoch mastheads going into outrage overdrive about one of the country's best journalists, if not the best, actually voicing an opinion. Australians are racist, she said, at an event, a non-ABC event. Oh, the righteous indignation from these moral arbiters from the Murdoch stable, who don't really get their hands dirty with news very much, but just sprout their identical opinions day in, day out. How dare she? How dare this woman express an opinion. The ABC went into crisis management mode, as it does, kowtowing to the hurt feelings in the Murdoch press, kowtowing to the news outrage. And they issued a statement, ABC management, saying that Laura Tingle was getting counselling. Counselling for Laura! It was a tad paternalistic, and nobody seemed to get the irony that the very night after Laura Tingle's off-the-cuff remarks, there was Josh Frydenberg, the former treasurer and Zionist, hosting a show saying racism, anti-Semitism has never been higher. Well, Palestinians are anti-Semitic too, but we won't get into those fineries at the moment. It was a crisis, said Josh. Records of anti-Semitism never before seen. And a government inquiry was urgently needed. It was dangerous, he said. People are feeling unsafe. No evidence of it, but people are feeling unsafe, said Josh. This was happening. This was unfolding at the very time of the Tingle affair. And the irony and the hypocrisy were supreme. And at this very same time, another affair, another bigotry-related imbroglio was playing out. The Julia Gillard situation, specifically targeted bigotry for commercial and political gain. Gillard, who was never favoured because she was Labor, not Liberal, by the Murdoch press, here she was, run off the front pages, splashed with the headline, "Ignorance feeding evil," which incidentally was right, but just not in the way that they meant it. Ignorance indeed is feeding evil. But here was Julia, and it was immensely disappointing to many people, including myself, who had held Julia in high regard and also admired the way that she never became one of those dreaded ghosts of an ex-PM that's always turning up in the media. Here she was, claiming that young Australians were ignorant because of social media and did not understand the history of the Middle East. They did not understand the crisis in Gaza at all because, social media, it was not disclaimed, of course, that social media is what is killing the business model of traditional media. These are arch enemies. Did she not understand what social media was, though? Simply people connecting with each other, having a discourse, expressing their views, linking some evidence to support those views sometimes. It is people. It is not some anti-Zionist conspiracy. As usual, no mention of the brutal war crimes being the reason that this is a public issue and hotly debated. No mention of that, just young people were dumb, apparently, because of social media. Now that means young people as old, because old people too are on social media. And now the young people know what the Nakba was. They are better informed. They are better politically engaged than they have been for generations, as the mainstream media cravenly runs its pro-genocide lobby editorial line. Young people are on the mark. They know more about world affairs. And no, they are not dumb. They are getting it right. And that's because a lot of old people are stuffing it up. Now, we don't pretend to get it right all the time, but we appreciate your support in the community because we don't have commercial and political agendas. We don't owe the government any money. We don't owe corporate advertisers any money. So thank you for your support.